Okay, so let's dive in. We're going to unpack something that, well, it always seems to be at the center of political talk, doesn't it? What actually happens when the things promised during a campaign, they don't quite line up with what unfolds down the road. It's a question that definitely sparks some strong feelings, and it's really central to the material we're digging into today. We've got our hands on a pretty fascinating opinion piece. It's titled Trump's Deceptions, Midterm Repercussions, offers some, well, compelling thoughts. Our mission today, like always, is to really take this source apart, pull out the most important bits of information. We want to guide you through the arguments it presents, specifically about the potential political consequences, the fallout from promises perceived as unkept. Think of this deep dive as, I guess, a shortcut, a way to understand one particular observer's take on a really critical piece of the political puzzle right now, seeing how they connect the dots between, specific actions, public feelings, and maybe what happens next in elections. Now, it's really important to state this up front. Everything we discuss today from this source, it reflects the specific opinions and the analysis within that piece. Okay, our job here is to explore those ideas impartially. We want to help you understand the perspectives, the insights offered without us endorsing them. We're just guides, really, walking you through the observations and the predictions made in this piece, helping you see what stands out in this specific assessment. So, yeah, let's get started on this deep dive.
The core argument, predicting midterm losses due to deception.
All right, so the source kicks things off with a pretty bold claim right out of the gate. It predicts that the Republican Party is actually poised to lose its majority in both houses of Congress. And the piece attributes this massive potential shift directly to Donald J. Trump. That's a significant claim, isn't it? Very direct, sets the stage immediately.
It really is. And what's compelling, I think, is that direct causal link the source is trying to draw. It's not just saying, here's what might happen. It's saying, here's why it might happen, and pointing to one person. The source digs right into this idea that promises made during the campaigns will haunt the supporters who believed when they did not see what they wanted. That phrasing, haunt, is really telling.
Haunt them. Yeah, that suggests something more than just policy disagreement. It sounds, I don't know, emotional, psychological.
Yeah. Exactly. The source isn't just talking about polling numbers changing. It's arguing there's this almost inevitable line from promises perceived as unfulfilled to a really deep voter disillusionment. And that disillusionment, the source claims, translates directly into electoral losses down the line.
So the core idea is that expectations were built up based on these campaign promises.
Right, carefully built. And when those expectations aren't met, in the view of these supporters, the emotional residue, that feeling of being let down, that haunting, as the source puts it, it becomes a tangible force, a force driving a real shift in how people vote or if they vote.
So it's less about the nitty-gritty policy details and more about trust and integrity.
That seems to be the argument. It's suggesting an erosion of faith, really. The psychological impact of hope turning into disappointment, subsection A, the nature of unkept promises cited.
Okay, so if that's the mechanism, this broken trust, this haunting, what specific promises does the source actually point to? It mentions a couple of examples, right, to kind of anchor this argument.
Yes. It highlights two key areas, and it uses them as sort of stand-ins for this broader pattern of perceived non-delivery. Concrete examples. First, the Jeffrey Epstein files.
Right, that comes up.
The implication there, according to the source, is that supporters expected, well, a full airing, revelations maybe, action taken against powerful people implicated.
And the source says that didn't happen, or not in the way people expected.
Essentially, yes.
Yeah.
That it didn't materialize to the satisfaction of those who'd pinned hopes on it. And you can see how, for some people, the idea of not getting full disclosure on something like Epstein, that could feel like a major breach, especially around accountability, transparency, issues with elites.
Okay, that makes sense. What's the second one?
The second one mentioned is the DOJ, Department of Efficiency promises.
DOJ, Department of Efficiency. I'm not sure I recall that exact term being widely used.
Right. The phrasing might be specific to the source, or maybe a shorthand it's using, but it clarifies. It's referring to a commitment, allegedly made, for significant governmental efficiency, or maybe a big restructuring of how federal agencies work.
Ah, okay. Cutting red tape, making things run better, that sort of thing.
Precisely. And the source claims this promised overhaul, this big change to make government more effective. It just didn't happen, not in a way that matched the hype anyway.
And that would feel like a deception about competence, about actually changing how Washington works.
That seems to be the argument. It taps into that desire for a less wasteful, more effective government. The source argues the perceived failure here adds to that sense of betrayal. But, and this is important, the source stresses it's not just these two things.
It's a pattern.
Exactly. It
Yeah.
presents it as a general feeling, the sort of pervasive sense that any promises, nothing was kept.
Wow, okay. That's a sweeping statement.
It is. And the Epstein files and this Doge idea, they serve as the concrete illustrations, the headline examples, if you will. They're meant to show the kind of deception the source is talking about. Not small things, but significant issues where promises were made, expectations set high.
And then, in the eyes of these supporters, nothing really changed or delivered.
That's the picture the source paints. And this perceived pattern, it argues, creates this powerful underlying resentment that fuels the whole thing. Subsection B, the shifting mood among supporters.
Okay, so if promises like these aren't kept, how does the source say these supporters are actually reacting? It sounds like it's not just one single reaction, but a whole range of things.
Yes, it describes a really interesting spectrum. It shows the depth, maybe, of the disaffection. On one end, you have people where many of the supporters are starting to get angry and leave.
So actively pulling their support, walking away.
Seems like it. A conscious decision to disengage, maybe even look elsewhere politically, not just being quietly unhappy. Then there's another group described as those who just remain silent.
Silent. So not angry and leaving, but checked out.
Potentially. Their silence suggests a loss of enthusiasm, right? Maybe they're not willing to argue for anymore, not motivated to show up. The source implies this silence is also a form of disillusionment, a quieter, but still significant, withdrawal of active support. Then it mentions some are just discouraged.
Discouraged. That sounds like a loss of hope. Fading optimism.
Yeah, a general disappointment. Maybe they haven't turned against him actively,
Yeah.
but that initial belief, that energy, has definitely faded, which of course impacts things like voter turnout. But then there's a really striking observation, I think. It says some of them are starting to turn against him, considering creating another political party.
Wow. Creating another party, that's a huge step. That goes way beyond just being discouraged.
It really does. It suggests a fundamental break, doesn't it? A feeling that the existing party, maybe even the whole structure, no longer represents them because of these perceived betrayals.
So the anger isn't just at the individual, but potentially at the party itself. Enough to want to start something new.
That's what the source implies. It points to a really profound level of dissatisfaction, potentially leading to real schisms, not just losing votes, but maybe fracturing the movement itself.
So looking at the bigger picture, the source is suggesting a serious erosion of the base, both in numbers and maybe in loyalty?
Precisely. Not just alienation, but maybe even creating fertile ground for internal conflict or alternative movements because the trust is so damaged. And the source tries to tie all these different reactions together with this vivid description. It says, no matter how we look at it, even those who support or those who just give up, the mood is always the same.
The same mood, even with different actions. How so?
It describes this cycle. One day they're happy about promises and the next day angry for not seeing anything happen as promised.
So it's like this recurring loop of hope followed by frustration.
Exactly, a dynamic cycle. And then it concludes, so the deception brings them together in anger.
Interesting. So whether they leave, stay silent, or try to form a new party, the underlying unifying feeling is this anger born from perceived deception.
That's the powerful claim the source makes, that this shared sense of betrayal, this collective anger, becomes the driving emotional force.
And that force is what the source predicts will hit hard in the midterms.
That's the argument, that this emotional undercurrent translates directly into political consequences.
The return of the dissatisfied voter. The immigration factor.
Okay, so we've talked about the core base, the original supporters, but the source brings up another group it thinks will shift their vote. And this is where it gets really interesting, talking about people who voted Republican last time, but they weren't typically Republican voters.
Exactly. It identifies this group, people who usually vote Democrat but crossed over, a key swing segment.
And the source predicts they're going back, switching again.
Yes. It states pretty clearly that some of those people will just vote Democrat again, and the reason given is specific. Because of the immigration policy.
Immigration. Okay, so what about the immigration policies does the source say is driving them back? It can't just be a general dislike, right?
No, the source doesn't leave it vague. It lays out specific grievances, particular issues with the policies that it argues are the catalysts for this predicted shift back.
So it's framing this switch back also as a reaction to, well, maybe not outright deception, but policies that fundamentally misaligned with what these voters expected or could tolerate.
That seems to be the angle, that the reality of the immigration policies implemented was something these crossover voters couldn't stomach, pushing them back to their original party. Subsection A, specific grievances with immigration policies.
Right, so it's not just immigration as a topic. The source gets specific. What are the actual criticisms it levels against the policies? What details does it highlight?
It's quite explicit, yeah. It lists several points that it argues would really alienate these voters. First, it claims there is no due process.
No due process. That's a fundamental legal principle. So the claim is that legal procedures weren't being followed properly.
That's the implication, a breakdown in fair proceedings. For voters who value rule of law, even if they wanted stricter enforcement, the absence of due process suggests arbitrary action, which could be a major red flag. Second, the source mentions discrimination in terms of deportation.
Discrimination, meaning unequal treatment. Based on what does it say?
It doesn't specify the basis in the quote provided, but the accusation itself is powerful that deportation decisions weren't applied fairly or evenly. That would certainly resonate negatively with voters concerned about equity. Third, it asserts there is no special consideration for anyone.
No exceptions. A completely rigid system.
That's the picture it paints. A system lacking flexibility or maybe compassion for individual circumstances, regardless of background or situation. A sort of cold, bureaucratic approach. Fourth, and this is a strong one, it says the detention and everything is inhumane.
Inhumane conditions. That's a very serious charge.
Extremely serious, suggesting a lack of basic human dignity in how people are treated while detained. That alone could be enough to push voters with humanitarian concerns away. And finally, it points to this sequence. The cancellation of legal status and then deportation follows.
So people who had some legal standing that was taken away, leading directly to deportation.
That's the process described. Taking away things like temporary protected status, visas, maybe asylum claims, and then moving quickly to removal. This creates a sense of instability, precarity.
Okay, so it's a list. Lack of due process, discrimination, no special consideration, inhumane detention, and revoking legal status leading to deportation.
Exactly. And the source bundled all of this together as part of, quote, just another deception.
Another deception. How does it frame that?
Well, the implication seems to be that these outcomes, these specific policy effects, were either a direct contradiction of what these voters might have been led to expect.
Or maybe just fundamentally clashed with the values that made them Democrats in the first place, even if they voted Republican once.
Precisely. The source argues these specific points are fundamental breaches of expectation or core values for this group. They are presented as the direct consequences that would push these crossover voters back to the Democratic Party, neatly tying it into the overall theme of promises not met or realities being starkly different from expectations.
Turning on allies. High-profile conflicts and media dynamics.
Okay, we've covered voters, the base, the crossovers, but the source also talks about another dynamic, right? This pattern of turning on people who were previously seen as supporters, or at least allies. It gives some pretty big names as examples.
Yes, it does. It points to Elon Musk as the latest example, and then mentions Tucker Carlson as another victim.
Musk and Carlson. So very high-profile figures, people who at various times might have seemed supportive or at least not openly hostile.
Exactly. The source highlights this as a pattern suggesting that even prominent allies aren't safe from facing, well, ire if they step out of line even slightly.
It suggests a low tolerance for dissent, maybe, or questioning.
That seems to be the implication, regardless of past support or stature, which then leads to the question the source implicitly asks. What did someone like Tucker Carlson do to become a victim in this narrative?
Right, because he was seen by many as a major media supporter for a long time.
Indeed. The source uses these examples to argue it's not just isolated incidents, but a trend where allies who raise concerns or point out inconsistencies become targets. And that, the source suggests, adds to the broader disillusionment. Subsection A, public figures and unkept promises.
So what was the specific issue with Tucker Carlson, according to this source? You said it connects back to the unkept promises idea.
Yes, directly. The source claims Carlson's situation arose, quote, just for pointing out certain promises which were not kept.
Just for pointing them out, so holding him accountable, essentially.
That's how the source frames it. And the specific promise cited relates to the Ukraine war.
Ah, okay. What was the promise versus the reality in the source's view?
The source states it very directly. Instead of finishing the war as he promised, he is now sending military aid packages.
Okay, so a promise to end the war versus the action of sending aid, which the source sees as prolonging it. A direct contradiction.
A stark contradiction. from the source's perspective. And it argues that's what led to Carlson facing negative consequences simply for highlighting this perceived U-turn. And the source makes a point about timing, too. It says, we are not even at the midterm yet, and we are seeing all those things going on in a U-turn in terms of promises.
So this isn't something happening after the fact, looking back. It's presented as an ongoing, active dynamic.
Right, highlighting the immediacy. It reinforces that core theme. Unkept promises or perceived reversals aren't just alienating voters, but also causing friction with powerful media allies.
It paints a picture where loyalty seems fragile, easily broken by these perceived betrayals, and where even internal criticism isn't tolerated.
That's the dynamic the source is describing, yes. Subsection B, intriguing media dynamics and predictions.
Okay, staying with the media. The source points out something it calls the funniest thing. It involves two big outlets, right? The Wall Street Journal and Fox News.
Yeah, it finds this situation particularly ironic. It highlights that Donald Trump is going to sue the Wall Street Journal.
To sue the Journal, okay.
While at the same time, their sister company, Fox News, is praising Donald Trump.
Ah, right. Same parent company, News Corp. So one part of the empire is being sued. The other is offering praise. That is kind of interesting.
The source definitely thinks so. And it uses this to raise questions about media motivations. It asks, is Fox News praising him out of natural love? Or is it by corporate orders to please a segment of the population who voted Republican?
So it's suggesting the praise might be strategic, driven by audience retention or corporate goals rather than pure editorial conviction.
That's the explicit suggestion. It points towards a perceived cynicism, maybe, where media narratives could be shaped by business needs or political calculations within these large corporations, leading to these seemingly contradictory stances. And then the source makes a prediction. It extends this pattern of turning on people. It predicts Joe Rogan is next.
Joe Rogan, why him?
The source says, I can predict, in my opinion, Joe Rogan is going to be the person Donald J. Trump is going to be angry against. And the reason given is because Joe Rogan is not biased.
Not biased, meaning he'll ask tough questions. Or won't just offer praise.
The source continues, at some point, Joe Rogan will want results.
Results, so accountability again, wanting to see if promises were actually kept.
Exactly. The source implies Rogan's independent stance, his platform where he talks to everyone, means he'll eventually push for substance, for outcomes. And that, the source predicts, will inevitably lead to conflict, just like it allegedly did with Carlson. It suggests anyone seeking accountability, not just offering support, becomes a potential target. And to really drive home the impact of these perceived mixed messages, the source brings up Alex Jones.
Alex Jones, how does he fit in?
It uses his situation as an example of the confusion these reversals cause, even among the most fervent supporters. It says Alex Jones right now is very confused.
Confused about what?
About the Epstein files, specifically. One day he wanted the Jeffrey Epstein files to be released. Another day he is confused whether the files on Jeffrey Epstein were a hoax because the president said so.
So Jones believed strongly in the files being real and important, but then Trump apparently called them a hoax, leaving Jones unsure what to believe.
Precisely. It's presented as a perfect example of cognitive dissonance. A loyal supporter caught between their own strongly held belief and demand for the files, and a conflicting statement from the leader they support.
That vividly illustrates how destabilizing these alleged U-turns can be, even for the core base.
Absolutely. The source uses it to show that the fallout isn't just external alienation, but internal confusion and a potential erosion of certainty even among the true believers.
Internal betrayal, the cabinet and post-midterm fallout.
Okay, so we've looked at voters, media figures, quite a wide net. But the source also turns its attention inward, right, to the administration itself, specifically cabinet members. It predicts a shakeup there, too. Based on what?
Yes, it suggests another group of people who are going to turn on Donald Trump will be his cabinet members.
His own cabinet turning on him. Why would they do that, according to the source?
It hinges on a very specific scenario, a trigger event. The source says this will happen if they lose the midterm elections like I think they are going to.
So it's contingent on losing the midterms. If they lose, then the cabinet members might turn.
That's the prediction. It sets up this cause and effect. Electoral defeat leads to internal conflict involving the cabinet.
So what's the immediate fallout for the cabinet members themselves if that defeat happens? Does the source explain the mechanics of it?
It does. It paints a picture rooted in, well, self-preservation and blame shifting, suggesting a chain reaction following a loss. Subsection A, the save face strategy and its consequences.
Okay, so if the midterms are lost, the source predicts a specific reaction regarding the cabinet. You mentioned save face. How does that play out?
The source predicts a pretty stark move. It says Donald Trump, just to save face, will just fire them.
Fire the cabinet members. Not just reshuffle, but outright fire them as a way to save face after a loss.
That's exactly how it's framed. Not as a strategic reset, but as a defensive move. A way to deflect blame for the defeat, show action, and basically protect his own image by making them the scapegoats.
Okay, so they get fired to take the heat. What happens next, according to the source? What's the consequence of that?
The immediate consequence the source predicts is betrayal. It says those people will feel betrayed and start to spill the beans.
Spill the beans. So, the fired cabinet members, feeling betrayed, will start revealing inside information, secrets, damaging stories.
That's the strong implication of spill the beans, yes. That these former insiders, feeling wronged and discarded, would no longer feel bound by loyalty or confidentiality. They'd start talking, sharing potentially critical perspectives from their time inside the administration, which could obviously create huge political headaches, negative press, maybe even investigations. And then the source predicts how Trump would react to that to his former cabinet members spilling the beans.
Let me guess. Not well.
The source predicts a familiar pattern. It says, as usual, Donald Trump will respond, in my opinion, by dehumanizing them.
Dehumanizing them. So, attacking their character, their credibility, maybe their personal lives.
That seems to be the implication of dehumanizing. The source suggests it's a consistent tactic. When challenged or criticized, especially by former insiders, the response is often personal and harsh, aimed at discrediting the messenger.
So it describes this cycle. Midterm loss leads to firing cabinet to save face, which leads to the fired members feeling betrayed and spinning beans, which then leads to them being attacked and dehumanized.
Exactly. The source portrays it as a predictable, cascading sequence of betrayal, retaliation, and increasing animosity, showing how the fallout from perceived failures can ripple destructively through the inner circle itself.
The grand deception, a 4-year term goal.
Okay, wow, we've covered a lot of ground here. Disillusioned supporters, returning Democrats, media figures turned adversaries, potentially betrayed cabinet members.
Yeah.
It's a pretty comprehensive picture of fracturing relationships and predicted fallout. What does the source say is the thread that ties all of this together? Is there an ultimate explanation offered for why all this alleged deception happened? What's the final realization these different groups supposedly come to?
Yes, the source attempts to bring all these different threads, all these individual stories of disappointment, anger, confusion, and betrayal into one single unifying conclusion. It states that ultimately, whether they are politicians, simple supporters, media influencers, or whoever supported him, they realized they were deceived. And the reason for that deception,
Yeah.
just to realize Donald Trump wanted to get another 4-year term.
So the ultimate goal, according to the source, behind all the unkept promises, the shifting stances, the turning on allies, it was all just about getting reelected.
That is the core thesis the source puts forward to synthesize everything.
Yeah.
It essentially asks, how does this singular motivation connect all the dots? And the answer, from the source's perspective, is that every instance we've discussed, the Epstein files, non-disclosure, the failed Doge promises, the Ukraine policy shift that angered Carlson, the potential scapegoating of cabinet members, all of it is explained by this pursuit of re-election.
So the argument is the promises weren't necessarily made with genuine intent to fulfill them, but more as strategic tools.
As calculated means to an end, yes. Tools to gain support, maintain loyalty, energize the base, win over swing voters, whatever was needed politically to secure another term. That's the source's interpretation. Now, the frustration of the base, the Democrats switching back, the media conflicts, Alex Jones's confusion, the predicted cabinet betrayal, the source presents all of these not as accidents or simple policy changes, but as direct consequences or symptoms of this larger calculated strategy focused solely on re-election.
It's the so what moment of the piece, essentially, providing that one big explanation.
Exactly. It's framed as the ultimate aha moment that the source believes everyone involved, from the average voter to the cabinet secretary, will eventually reach.
A realization that their trust, their hopes, their support were, in this view, manipulated for one overarching political goal.
That's the powerful and quite cynical conclusion the source draws. A profound sense, it suggests, of having been used. Outro.
Well, we have certainly taken a comprehensive deep dive into this particular opinion piece, Trump's deceptions, midterm repercussions. We've really unpacked its central argument, the idea that perceived unkept promises could, in its view, lead to pretty significant midterm losses for the Republican Party. We got into the specifics, didn't we? The shifting mood among supporters, that whole spectrum from anger and leaving to silence to even thinking about starting new parties. We looked at why the source thinks some former Democrats might switch back, focusing on those specific criticisms of immigration policies, due process, discrimination, inhumane conditions, and we examined those high-profile conflicts the source highlights, with media figures like Elon Musk, Tucker Carlson, its prediction about Joe Rogan, and even using Alex Jones to illustrate supporter confusion. And finally, that prediction about internal fallout, about cabinet members potentially being fired post-midterms and then spilling the beans. The source really does meticulously try to link all these different strands, all these alleged deceptions, and the reactions to them back to what it sees as a singular driving goal attributed to Donald Trump. Secure another 4 years in office. It's definitely a fascinating and very detailed look at how one observer connects the dots between events, public sentiment, and political consequences. A very specific narrative about trust, betrayal, and political dynamics.
It really is.
Yeah.
And I think this deep dive into the source's perspective really highlights its argument about the potent impact of broken trust, how perceived betrayals can ripple outwards. It definitely makes you think, doesn't it? About the whole nature of political promises, voter expectations. They're complex, often very personal things. So what does this particular source suggest about just how powerful voter disappointment can be in shaping elections? Does that feeling of being let down have a lasting impact, maybe regardless of who the specific political figures are?
That's a great question.
And how might these kinds of dynamics, promise, perception, reaction, consequence, continue to play out? How might they keep influencing our politics long after the specific events this source talks about are in the rearview mirror? How is trust built and broken and maybe rebuilt in politics today?
Definitely something to mull over as you follow the news and try to make sense of it all.